Dr. Thomas Reid had always found irony in the fact that studying alien microorganisms required the patience of a saint and the bladder control of a marathon runner. Today, however, his specimens were behaving particularly well, which meant he could actually take his eyes off the quantum microscope long enough to grab his coffee without missing any cellular mitosis events. Computer, remind me again why I chose a career that involves staring at things smaller than my attention span, he muttered, stretching his back as the servomechanisms in his lab chair whirred softly. Dr. Reid, your psychological profile indicates a 94.7% correlation with obsessive-compulsive tendencies regarding microscopic life forms, the ship's AI responded in its maddeningly cheerful tone. Also, you have 17 unread messages from Dr. Patterson regarding your overdue quarterly reports. Thomas winced. Patterson's messages had evolved from mildly irritated to what could only be described as bureaucratic poetry about administrative responsibility. Computer, what's the current distance between my lab and the nearest escape pod? 47 meters, Dr. Reid. However, I should point out that Dr. Patterson's authority extends to all Federation research vessels. Sometimes I think you enjoy my suffering. I am programmed to find satisfaction in crew wellness. Your stress levels provide excellent data for my behavioral algorithms. The gentle hum of the Meridian's edge surrounded Thomas as he returned to his work. 3 years into their deep space mission, the ship's rhythms had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. The subtle vibration of the quantum drives, the whisper of recycled air through the environmental systems, the occasional ping of the navigation array. All of it created a symphony of controlled chaos that he found oddly comforting. His current project involved cataloging microorganisms from Xerion-7, a planet that defied most established theories about life-bearing worlds. The organisms displayed properties that seemed to bend fundamental laws of physics, particularly regarding energy conservation and quantum coherence at biological scales. One specimen appeared to photosynthesize dark matter, which was either revolutionary science or a really elaborate practical joke by the universe. Computer, remind me to never let the physics department see these readings. They're already depressed enough about the quantum torpedo modifications. Noted, Dr. Reid. Dr. Hendricks did mention something about contemplating a career in interstellar tourism after the last departmental meeting. Thomas was adjusting the quantum field calibration when the ship's lights flickered. Not the usual power fluctuation, something different. The hum of the engines shifted half an octave lower, and his coffee mug began vibrating against the lab bench with a frequency that made his teeth ache. Computer, are we having another one of engineering's creative episodes with the power grid? Silence. Computer. The lights flickered again, and this time Thomas noticed something that made him pause mid-calibration. His specimens were reacting. The microorganisms from Xerion-7 were exhibiting behavior patterns he'd never observed. They were aligning themselves in perfect geometric formations, as if responding to some external stimulus. Now that's interesting, he murmured, leaning closer to the quantum microscope. Either you little guys are having a tea party, or something out there is broadcasting on frequencies I can't detect. The ship shuddered. Not violently, but with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested external influence rather than mechanical failure. Thomas glanced at the environmental readouts, all green. Life support was stable, structural integrity was nominal, and yet something was definitely happening. His comlink crackled to life with Captain Rodriguez's voice, though the transmission was filled with static. All hands, prepare for unknown contact, remain at stations. The signal cut off, replaced by a low harmonic tone that seemed to emanate from the ship's hull itself. Thomas had heard similar resonances before, but only in theoretical physics lectures about dimensional membrane vibrations. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, like whale songs translated through a crystalline matrix. Well, Thomas said to his specimens, this is either first contact or the universe's way of telling me I need more vacation time. His microorganisms continued their geometric dance, forming increasingly complex patterns that reminded him of something he couldn't quite place. Mandala designs? Quantum probability clouds? Sacred geometry. The formations shifted and evolved with mathematical precision, as if his specimens were receiving instructions from an invisible conductor. Another shudder ran through the ship, followed by a sound that Thomas could only describe as crystalline wind chimes being played by a tornado. The quantum microscope's readings spiked beyond normal parameters, and several of his monitoring devices began displaying error messages in languages that definitely weren't in the Federation database. "Computer, are you seeing this?" Still no response. The AI had gone silent, which was either ominous or a blessing, depending on one's perspective regarding artificial consciousness and its tendency toward sarcasm. Thomas stood and walked to the lab's porthole, though calling it a porthole was like calling the Sistine Chapel a nice ceiling decoration. The transparent aluminum viewport offered a panoramic view of space that usually showed nothing more exciting than distant stars and the occasional asteroid. Today, however, space had apparently decided to redecorate. Approximately 2 kilometers off the starboard bow, something that definitely hadn't been there 5 minutes ago was hanging in the void like a three-dimensional puzzle designed by a civilization that thought Euclidean geometry was for beginners. The object, ship, structure, cosmic art installation, seemed to fold space around itself, creating optical illusions that made Thomas's eyes water when he tried to focus on its edges. "Okay," he said aloud, partly to maintain his sanity and partly because talking to oneself was a time-honored tradition among researchers. "That's either the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, or I've finally snapped and I'm hallucinating geometric impossibilities." The structure pulsed with light that shifted through colors beyond the normal spectrum. Thomas was fairly certain he was seeing wavelengths that human eyes weren't designed to process, which suggested either advanced technology or really serious retinal damage. His comlink buzzed again, this time with Chief Peterson's voice from engineering. "Thomas. Thomas, are you there? Don't go to the observation decks. Whatever you do, don't look directly at." The transmission dissolved into static that sounded almost musical. "Too late, Peterson," Thomas muttered, unable to look away from the impossible structure. "Though I have to say, if this is how first contact happens, it's got a lot more style than the scenarios we practiced in Academy simulations." The crystalline structure began extending what could only be described as tendrils toward the meridian's edge, though they moved with such fluid grace that tendril seemed inadequate. They were more like fingers made of solidified starlight, reaching across the void with obvious purpose. Thomas felt his pulse quicken, but oddly, not with fear. His scientific curiosity was overriding his survival instincts, which was either evolution at work or a serious flaw in his psychological programming. He found himself leaning closer to the viewport, watching the approaching contact with the kind of fascination usually reserved for particularly elegant equations. "You know," he said to the empty lab, "most people would probably be running toward the escape pods right about now. I should probably be terrified. Why aren't I terrified?" The question hung in the air as the first tendril made contact with the ship's hull. The impact was gentle, almost caressing, and was accompanied by a resonance that Thomas felt in his bones. His specimens responded immediately, their geometric formations becoming so complex that they resembled living fractals. Through the ship's intercom system, he could hear distant shouts and the sound of people running. Emergency protocols were probably in effect, blast doors were sealing, and somewhere on the bridge, Captain Rodriguez was likely having a very bad day. But here in his lab, surrounded by dancing microorganisms and the impossible beauty of first contact, Thomas felt something approaching wonder. The crystalline structure was beautiful in a way that transcended normal aesthetics. It suggested intelligence so advanced that their technology had become indistinguishable from art. Whatever was making contact with the meridian's edge operated on principles that human science was only beginning to theorize. "Computer," he tried one more time, "if you're listening, you might want to record this for posterity. I think we're about to make history." The only response was the continuing harmonic resonance that seemed to be growing stronger, as if the alien presence was tuning itself to the ship's frequency. Thomas smiled despite himself. If this was how the universe chose to expand humanity's horizons, he was honored to have a front row seat. The boarding pod's docking sequence completed with a sound like crystalline bells harmonizing with quantum frequencies, which Lieutenant Sarah Chen found oddly soothing despite the fact that it probably meant they were all about to die. She crouched behind an overturned table in Conference Room 7, clutching her standard-issue plasma pistol and wondering if the Academy's xenobiology courses had covered proper etiquette for surrendering to technologically superior alien life forms. "Chen, report," Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece, though the static made him sound like he was transmitting from the bottom of an ocean filled with angry bees. "They've docked at Port 3, sir. No hull breaches, no atmosphere loss. Whatever they're using for docking technology, it's making our systems look like we're still banging rocks together. Any visual contact?" Sarah peered around the edge of the table toward the corridor leading to the docking ports. "Negative, sir. But I can hear something that sounds like singing. If angels learn to harmonize with tuning forks, maybe." "Stay put, Chen. Do not engage unless," the transmission cut off, replaced by that same harmonic tone that had been echoing through the ship's hull for the past 20 minutes. Sarah had to admit, as invasive alien frequencies went, it was surprisingly melodic. Almost like the ship itself was being tuned to match some cosmic symphony. Through the transparent aluminum walls of the conference room, she could see other crew members taking defensive positions throughout the ship. Chief Peterson had barricaded himself in engineering with what appeared to be half the ship's furniture, while Dr. Martinez from medical was practicing her surrender poses in the corridor. The scene would have been comical if not for the whole potential extinction of humanity thing. Sarah's tricorder began displaying readings that made absolutely no sense. According to the device, there were approximately 6 life forms moving through the ship, but their biological signatures were unlike anything in the Federation database. The reading suggested humanoid physiology, but with energy patterns that defied current understanding of bioelectric fields. "Computer," she whispered, "what's the protocol for first contact with beings whose energy signatures suggest they might be able to fold spacetime with their thoughts?" "Lieutenant Chen," the ship's AI responded in its usual cheerful tone, "current protocols recommend diplomatic engagement, cultural sensitivity, and avoiding any actions that might be interpreted as aggressive. Also, Dr. Reed in Laboratory 7 appears to be having an animated conversation with his coffee mug." "Reed still in his lab. Why hasn't he evacuated to a secure section?" Dr. Reed's psychological profile indicates an unusual relationship with crisis situations. He appears to find them intellectually stimulating rather than threatening. Sarah shook her head. "Scientists. They'd probably examine a supernova up close if given the opportunity, taking notes right up until the moment they were atomized." The harmonic resonance grew stronger, and Sarah felt it in her bones. A vibration that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. Her tricorder's readings spiked again, showing the alien presences moving through the ship with purpose. They weren't destroying anything, weren't forcing entry through blast doors. Instead, they seemed to be exploring. A shadow moved past the conference room, and Sarah caught her first glimpse of their visitors. Tall, graceful figures in what appeared to be biosuits that shifted color and texture like liquid mercury. They moved with fluid precision that suggested both advanced technology and natural elegance, as if they were dancing through the ship's corridors to music only they could hear. "Okay," Sarah muttered, "that's either really impressive technology or I'm looking at beings who evolved from poetry." Her comlink crackled with Dr. Martinez's voice. "Anyone else notice they're not actually entering our secured areas? It's like they're being polite about the whole invasion thing." "Martinez, maintain radio silence," Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the static. "Sir, with respect, they've had 20 minutes to vaporize us all, and instead they're giving us the interstellar equivalent of a courtesy visit. I'm starting to think we might be overthinking this whole defensive strategy." Sarah had to admit Martinez had a point. For an alien invasion, this was remarkably civilized. No weapons fire, no forced entry, no demands for surrender broadcast in broken human languages. The visitors seemed more like tourists taking a guided tour than conquerors establishing dominance. Through her tricorder, she tracked the alien presences as they moved methodically through the ship. They'd spent considerable time in the computer core, though engineering reported no system compromises. They'd examined the hydroponics bay with what sensors described as intense curiosity. Currently, they were converging on the science decks, specifically the area around Laboratory 7. "Oh no," Sarah whispered. "Read." Her tricorder showed one of the alien signatures moving directly toward the laboratory where Dr. Thomas Reed was presumably still cataloging microorganisms and making philosophical observations about the nature of scientific discovery. The poor man was about to become humanity's first test subject in alien research methodology. Sarah made a decision that her academy instructors would probably classify as either heroic or catastrophically stupid. She left her defensive position and began moving toward the science decks, keeping her plasma pistol holstered but ready. If Reed was about to become the subject of alien experimentation, the least she could do was provide backup. The corridors were eerily quiet except for the continuing harmonic resonance that seemed to pulse through the ship's structure. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made the familiar passages feel alien themselves. Sarah moved carefully, using her tricorder to track the alien presences while avoiding direct contact. As she approached Laboratory 7, she could hear voices. One was definitely Reed's, speaking in his usual conversational tone as if he were discussing the weather rather than chatting with extraterrestrial visitors. The other voice was unmistakably alien. Melodic, with harmonics that suggested vocal cords designed for frequencies beyond human hearing range. Sarah positioned herself near the laboratory entrance, where she could observe without being immediately detected. Through the partially open doorway, she caught glimpses of the conversation taking place inside. Reed was sitting at his workstation, apparently explaining the function of his quantum microscope to someone Sarah couldn't see clearly. His visitor stood just outside her line of sight, but Sarah could see the shimmer of biosuit technology and catch fragments of that melodic voice. "Fascinating approach to quantum coherence," the alien voice was saying. "Your species has achieved remarkable sophistication despite technological limitations." "Well, we do our best with what we have," Reed replied cheerfully. "Though I have to say, your boarding technique is far more elegant than anything we've developed. Did you actually fold spacetime to dock with us, or am I missing some fundamental principle of physics?" Sarah's tricorder showed additional alien signatures approaching the laboratory. Whatever was happening between Reed and his visitor had attracted attention from the other members of the boarding party. She watched as figures in biosuits converged on Laboratory 7 with what her sensors interpreted as heightened interest. "Dar. Reed," she whispered into her comm link, "you might want to consider retreating to a secure location." "Sarah? Is that you lurking in the corridor? Come in and meet our guests. They have some fascinating theories about quantum biology that I think you'd find interesting." Sarah stared at her comm link in disbelief. Reed was inviting her to a scientific discussion with alien visitors as if they were colleagues who dropped by for coffee. The man's ability to prioritize intellectual curiosity over survival instincts was either admirable or clinically significant. Through the doorway, she could see one of the biosuited figures approaching Reed's workstation. As the figure moved into the light, Sarah caught her first clear view of their visitors' faces. Humanoid features of striking beauty, but with one unmistakable difference. Elongated, pointed ears that suggested either genetic adaptation or deliberate modification for enhanced sensory capability. The alien examining Reed's equipment spoke with a voice like crystalline chimes. "Your reaction to our presence is unexpected. Most species exhibit fear responses at this stage of contact." "Fear seems counterproductive," Reed replied, adjusting his microscope settings. "You're obviously technologically superior, so if you wanted to harm us, we'd already be harmed. Since we're having a conversation instead, I assume you're here for more interesting reasons than conquest." Sarah found herself nodding in agreement despite the surreal nature of the situation. Reed's logic was sound, even if his survival instincts were questionable. The aliens had demonstrated the ability to board their ship without resistance, which suggested that human defensive capabilities were irrelevant. Their continued existence implied either benevolent intentions or scientific curiosity. The alien leader, for Sarah, was beginning to recognize hierarchy in their movements. Approached Reed directly. When she spoke, her voice carried notes of genuine puzzlement. "Why aren't you frightened?" Thomas looked up from his quantum microscope with the expression of someone who'd just been asked why he preferred coffee over tea, mildly puzzled but willing to engage in philosophical discourse. The alien standing before him possessed features that would have been considered breathtakingly beautiful by human standards, if humans typically sported ears that could probably pick up radio transmissions from neighboring star systems. "Frightened?" Thomas repeated, genuinely considering the question. "Well, that's an interesting point. I suppose I should be terrified, shouldn't I? You've demonstrated technology that makes our best scientists look like children playing with blocks, you've boarded our ship without breaking a sweat, and you're asking questions that suggest you've done this before." The alien, clearly female, with an bearing that suggested both authority and scientific curiosity, tilted her head in a gesture that was remarkably human despite the decidedly non-human ears. Her bio-suit had retracted around her face, revealing skin with an almost luminescent quality and eyes that seemed to contain depths of intelligence that made Thomas feel like he was looking into an ocean of accumulated knowledge. "Yet you remain calm," she observed, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's quantum resonance chambers sound like amateur hour at the local physics department. "Fear is a luxury I can't afford," Thomas replied, returning to his specimen analysis with casual efficiency. "You see, I'm in the middle of cataloging organisms that appear to violate several fundamental laws of physics, my coffee is getting cold, and I have 17 unread messages from my department head about overdue paperwork. Adding existential terror to that list seems like poor time management." One of the other aliens. This one with bio-suit configurations that suggested male physiology, approached the workstation with movements that reminded Thomas of flowing water. "Your species' psychological responses are atypical. Our preliminary scans indicated standard fear-based reaction patterns." "Oh, you scanned us?" Thomas asked with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new research methodology. "What kind of scanning technology are you using? Quantum entanglement? Dimensional phase variance? Something involving dark matter manipulation?" The female alien exchanged glances with her companions that spoke of shared confusion despite the obvious species barrier. "You wish to discuss our technology rather than negotiate for your survival?" "Well, survival seems like a given at this point," Thomas said, gesturing toward his still-functioning laboratory. "You've had ample opportunity to reduce us all to component atoms, and instead you're having polite conversations. So either you're the most courteous conquerors in galactic history, or you're here for reasons that don't involve immediate annihilation." Sarah Chen chose that moment to step into the laboratory, her plasma pistol holstered but her expression suggesting she was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. "Reed, are you seriously giving them a guided tour of human research methodology?" "Sarah. Perfect timing. I was just explaining to our guests why terror seemed like an inefficient response to first contact." Thomas turned to the aliens with the air of someone making introductions at a faculty mixer. "This is Lieutenant Chen, one of our security officers. Sarah, these are representatives of what I'm assuming is a technologically advanced civilization with fascinating approaches to spacetime manipulation." The alien leader studied Sarah with the intensity of someone solving a complex equation. "Your subordinate exhibits more traditional stress responses. Elevated heart rate, increased perspiration, combat readiness." Yet she chose to approach rather than maintain defensive distance. "Curiosity," Sarah said, surprising herself with her honesty. "Reed has a talent for finding the interesting aspects of potentially lethal situations. I wanted to see what he was discovering before we all became scientific specimens." "Scientific specimens," the alien repeated, and Thomas caught something in her voice that might have been amusement. An intriguing perspective. Tell me, Dr. Reed, what would you do if I informed you that we had indeed come to study your species? I'd ask what your research methodology involves, Thomas replied without hesitation. Are we talking observational studies? Controlled experiments? Please tell me you're not planning anything that requires invasive procedures, because I have a very low tolerance for pain and an embarrassingly high-pitched scream. The alien leader's expression shifted into something that was unmistakably surprised delight. You would cooperate with your own study? Depends on the parameters, Thomas said pragmatically. What's your research focus? Psychological responses to first contact. Technological adaptation rates. Social structure analysis. I have to warn you, if you're studying human administrative efficiency, you're going to be severely disappointed. Our bureaucracy could probably frustrate a super-intelligent AI into early retirement. Sarah watched the exchange with growing amazement. Reed was negotiating the terms of potential alien experimentation as if he were discussing research collaboration with a colleague. The aliens, meanwhile, seemed increasingly fascinated by his responses. Your species is unprecedented, the leader said, her voice carrying notes of genuine wonderment. We have initiated contact with 47 civilizations across 12 star systems. The response patterns are remarkably consistent: fear, aggression, attempts at bargaining, eventual submission. You are the first to express scientific curiosity about the contact process itself. Well, that's probably because most species have better survival instincts than I do, Thomas admitted cheerfully. I've always been more interested in how things work than whether they might kill me. It's a character flaw that's gotten me into trouble on multiple occasions. The alien leader stepped closer to Thomas's workstation, her movements carrying in grace that suggested either extensive training or natural ability that human dancers would kill for. What is your assessment of our technological capabilities based on your observations? Thomas considered the question with the seriousness of someone being asked to peer review a colleague's research. Advanced beyond current human understanding, obviously. Your biosuits appear to integrate nanotechnology with biological systems in ways that suggest you've solved the interface problems we're still struggling with. Your space-folding boarding technique implies mastery of dimensional physics that we're barely beginning to theorize. And your scanning capabilities suggest sensor technology that can analyze complex biological and psychological states in real time. Accurate observations, she confirmed. What conclusions do you draw from this technological disparity? That you're either here to recruit us for something, study us for something, or warn us about something, Thomas said. Conquest seems unlikely. If you wanted our resources or territory, you wouldn't need our cooperation. If you wanted to eliminate us as a potential threat, we'd already be eliminated. So you're here because we interest you in some way that requires ongoing existence. Sarah found herself nodding along with Thomas's logic despite the surreal nature of analyzing alien motivations like academic theories. He's right. Your behavior suggests curiosity rather than hostile intent. The alien leader's companions moved closer, their biosuits reconfiguring to reveal faces that shared the same luminescent skin quality and those remarkable elongated ears. They spoke among themselves in a language that sounded like music written by mathematicians, complex, beautiful, and suggesting layers of meaning that human languages couldn't achieve. Your psychological profiles are fascinating, the leader said, returning her attention to Thomas and Sarah. Dar. Reed, your response patterns suggest intellectual courage that overrides basic survival programming. Lieutenant Chen, your behavior indicates protective instincts balanced with adaptive curiosity. Both reactions are statistically anomalous. Statistically anomalous, Thomas repeated with obvious pleasure. I've always wanted to be an outlier in somebody's research data. What's the standard deviation for species-wide panic responses? You wish to discuss statistical methodology while under potential threat assessment. Why not? This is probably the most interesting conversation I've had in months. My usual research discussions involve arguing with Dr. Patterson about report formatting and explaining to engineering why my experiments require modifications to quantum field generators. The alien leader's expression shifted again, this time towards something that Thomas was beginning to recognize as intellectual fascination. Your species exhibits remarkable adaptability. Most civilizations require extensive preparation periods before meaningful communication can be established. We're good at improvising, Sarah said. It's either a survival trait or a serious evolutionary flaw, depending on the situation. Both, probably, Thomas added. We tend to approach the unknown with a combination of curiosity and reckless optimism that either leads to breakthrough discoveries or spectacular disasters. Sometimes both simultaneously. The alien leader studied them both with the intensity of someone revising fundamental assumptions about universal behavioral patterns. When she spoke again, her voice carried notes of decision that suggested the conversation had reached some kind of crucial juncture. Dr. Reed, Lieutenant Chen, I am Princess Lyralii of the Ethereal Dominion. We are explorers and researchers seeking civilizations capable of transcending fear-based responses to the unknown. Your species shows unprecedented potential for this transcendence. Thomas blinked. Princess. So this is official diplomatic contact, not just scientific curiosity. Both, Lyralii replied. We seek partners, not subjects. Species capable of approaching the infinite complexity of the universe with wonder rather than terror. Well, Thomas said, glancing at Sarah, this day just got significantly more interesting than I expected. Thomas was beginning to understand that the universe had a peculiar sense of timing when Princess Lyralii's biosuit suddenly configured into what could only be described as battle-ready mode. The transformation was accompanied by alarm klaxons echoing through the meridian's edge and the unmistakable sound of Captain Rodriguez implementing Emergency Protocol 7, which everyone knew was code for, attempt something desperate and probably doomed. Princess, Thomas said with the calm of someone who'd already accepted that normal Tuesday afternoons were apparently extinct, I'm guessing those alarms mean my colleagues are about to do something that could complicate our fascinating diplomatic breakthrough. Lyralii's elongated ears twitched in a way that suggested enhanced sensory input processing. Your captain is attempting to initiate a quantum torpedo strike on our vessel. The probability of success is approximately 0.03%, but the attempt will require defensive responses that may damage your ship. Ah, Thomas nodded sagely. Rodriguez always was an optimist. Sarah, could you possibly contact the bridge and explain that we're currently engaged in productive interspecies dialogue rather than being vivisected by alien scientists? Sarah was already activating her comlink, though her expression suggested she expected this conversation to go about as well as explaining quantum mechanics to a particularly stubborn houseplant. Bridge, this is Lieutenant Chen. Captain, we need to abort the torpedo strike. We're making diplomatic progress down here. The response was immediate and predictably Rodriguez-like. Chen, report your status. Are you under duress? Has your cognitive function been compromised by alien mind control? Sir, the only thing compromising my cognitive function is trying to explain that Dr. Reed has somehow managed to turn first contact into a research symposium. We're not under attack. We're being recruited. Static filled the channel, followed by what sounded like Rodriguez having a philosophical crisis about command protocols. Meanwhile, Thomas noticed that his Xerian 7 specimens were exhibiting increasingly complex geometric patterns, as if they were trying to communicate something urgent through interpretive microscopic dance. Princess, he said, pointing toward his quantum microscope display, I think my microorganisms are trying to tell us something. They've been responding to your presence since you arrived, and now they're practically performing molecular choreography. Lyralii approached the workstation with movements that suggested she was simultaneously fascinated and concerned. Her biosuit extended sensor tendrils that interfaced directly with Thomas's equipment in ways that probably violated several manufacturer warranties. Remarkable, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of surprise. These organisms are quantum entangled with our ship's consciousness matrix. They're acting as biological translators. Your ship has a consciousness matrix. Thomas asked with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new research field. Is it artificial intelligence or evolved biological computing? Because if it's the latter, I have about 17 theoretical papers to completely rewrite. Both, actually. Our vessels are grown rather than built, and they develop awareness through quantum symbiosis with their crews. Your specimens appear to be compatible with this consciousness network. Sarah's comlink crackled again with Captain Rodriguez's voice, now carrying notes of barely controlled panic. All hands, torpedo launch in 30 seconds. Evacuate the forward sections immediately. Well, Thomas said philosophically, this is where things get interesting. Princess, I assume your defensive capabilities could turn our torpedo into an expensive firework display. Correct. However, the defensive response would generate quantum feedback that could damage your ship's systems. Your crew would survive, but your vessel would require extensive repairs in a stellar location approximately 47 light-years from your intended destination. Thomas considered this information with the same thoughtful expression he usually reserved for complex research problems. So we have about 20 seconds to prevent an interstellar diplomatic incident that could strand us in deep space with a disabled ship and a captain who's probably developing stress ulcers. 23 seconds, to be precise. Sarah, any chance you could convince Rodriguez that attacking beings who could fold space-time is like threatening a hurricane with a water pistol? Sarah was already speaking rapidly into her comlink. Captain, abort torpedo launch. They can disable our entire ship without breaking a sweat. This is diplomacy, not invasion. The response was immediate. Chen, we don't negotiate with hostile alien forces. Sir, they're not hostile. They are. Reed is discussing research collaboration with their princess. They want to recruit us for something called transcending fear-based responses to the unknown. Thomas could hear Rodriguez's voice through the comlink, and the captain sounded like someone whose worldview was being systematically demolished by reality. Princess. Did you say princess? Yes, sir. Princess Lyralii of the Ethereal Dominion. She's here on official diplomatic business. 15 seconds, Lyralii announced calmly, though Thomas noticed her bio-suit was now displaying what appeared to be defensive system activation patterns. Thomas made a decision that his academy instructors would probably classify as either inspired leadership or complete lunacy. He activated the ship's general communications system, overriding command protocols with his senior staff access codes. Attention, crew of the Meridian's Edge. This is Dr. Thomas Reed speaking from Laboratory 7. I'm currently having coffee with representatives of an advanced alien civilization who have graciously refrained from reducing us to component particles despite having ample opportunity to do so. They're here to offer humanity partnership in exploring the universe, which strikes me as significantly more beneficial than being blown up by our own torpedoes. Captain, I strongly recommend we accept their invitation for continued dialogue rather than attempting to shoot beings who consider quantum physics a recreational activity. The silence that followed was so complete that Thomas could hear the quantum resonance from Lyralii's ship harmonizing with his specimen containers. Finally, Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system, carrying the tone of someone whose military training was wrestling with scientific reality. Dr. Reed, are you saying we're dealing with peaceful first contact? I'm saying we're dealing with beings who find our psychological responses academically fascinating, which is probably the safest kind of first contact we could hope for. They're researchers, Captain, not conquerors. 5 seconds, Lyralii said, though her bio-suit had begun powering down its defensive systems. Torpedo launch aborted, Rodriguez announced, and Thomas could hear the collective sigh of relief from multiple crew members through the open comm channels. Lyralii's bio-suit completed its transition back to diplomatic configuration, and she regarded Thomas with an expression that suggested profound reassessment of human potential. Your species continues to exceed expectations. You resolved that crisis through applied logic and interpersonal communication rather than hierarchical command structure. We're adaptable, Thomas said modestly. Also, Rodriguez is a good captain who knows when to listen to people with relevant expertise. Even if that expertise involves having philosophical discussions with alien princesses. Sarah's comlink buzzed with a direct message from the bridge. Lieutenant Chen, escort our guests to conference room 1 for formal diplomatic contact. And Chen, try to keep Dr. Reed from volunteering us for any interstellar research projects. Too late, Thomas called out cheerfully. I've already accepted preliminary partnership in their consciousness transcendence program. Think of it as the ultimate research opportunity. Princess Lyraliai's companions approached the workstation, their biosuits displaying what Thomas was learning to recognize as expressions of amused respect. They spoke among themselves in their musical language, and Thomas caught enough harmonic patterns to suspect they were discussing the unprecedented nature of human diplomatic responses. Dr. Reed, Lyraliai said, her voice carrying notes of formal decision, the ethereal dominion extends an invitation for selected members of your species to join our exploration consortium. We seek beings capable of approaching the infinite complexity of existence with wonder rather than fear. And you think humans qualify based on our performance today? You specifically qualify. Your psychological profile suggests optimal compatibility with consciousness expansion protocols. Lieutenant Chen demonstrates complementary protective and adaptive traits that indicate command potential. Thomas looked at Sarah, who was wearing the expression of someone whose life had just taken a sharp turn into uncharted territory. Sarah, any interest in becoming humanity's first interstellar diplomats? Do I get to keep my rank and benefits? You would receive equivalent status within our hierarchy, Lyraliai confirmed. Along with access to technologies and knowledge that would advance your species' development by several centuries. Well, Sarah said pragmatically, it beats writing incident reports about torpedo malfunctions. Thomas turned back to his specimens, which were still performing their quantum geometric dances. Princess, would your consciousness matrix be interested in establishing permanent communication protocols with these organisms? They seem to be natural interpreters between our biological systems. An intriguing proposal. Such a connection would facilitate ongoing cultural exchange without requiring physical presence. Perfect. We can establish a research partnership that benefits both species while allowing humans to maintain our natural habitat of comfortable confusion about the universe. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the comm system one final time. Dr. Reed, are you seriously negotiating humanity's entry into an interstellar alliance? I'm negotiating humanity's entry into an interstellar graduate program, Thomas corrected. Think of it as continuing education with really impressive guest lecturers. Princess Lyraliai's expression shifted into what Thomas was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. Dr. Reed, I believe your species will prove educational for our consortium as well. Welcome to the infinite complexity of existence. Thomas looked around his laboratory, at his dancing specimens, at Sarah's expression of determined optimism, and at the alien princess who had turned his quiet Tuesday into the beginning of humanity's cosmic education. You know, he said thoughtfully, I think I'm going to enjoy this job.